This is John Desjardins. You're on another episode of Indigenous Voices and Resource Development Podcast. This is an extra special episode. And so this is actually one of our first episodes where we got to talk to three people at once in our attempt to tell a story from multiple perspectives on a very complex and challenging issue. And that is in regards to nuclear energy and at the end of its life cycle, the waste that is produced. And so we're here with three wonderful individuals who are championing that effort to help educate and truly inform the decisions made by potential impacted Indigenous communities. And so first we have Greg. So Greg, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from.
Greg Plain. I work with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in intermediate level waste. It's a new project for us. I come from Aamjiwnaang First Nation. I got 4 kids, married for 33 years, which is wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. That feat in itself. Yeah. Awesome. And then we have Brittany. Tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, community, kinship ties.
My name is Brittany Jones. My Anishinaabe name is Adonga Wishkiki. I'm from the Ashingnaming First Nation in Southern Ontario, right on the shores of Georgian Bay. I have 2 young kids. I have not been married for 30 years. I'm a new language learner. I do a lot of beadwork and leather work and things like that in my community. And for my 9 to 5, I work for the Nuclear Waste Management Organization as the manager of Indigenous Assessment.
And we have Sara. Please.
My English name is Sara Loft. I'm from Tyendinaga, Mohawk Territory, where I was born and raised. And I moved away for a little bit to Ottawa for a few years. I moved back to my community about 13 years ago now. I have 5 kids, and we're a blended family. Our oldest is 27, and our youngest is 8. So there's a bit of a gap there. I am actually a consultant. I own my own company. I do community engagement. I worked with the Nuclear Waste Management Organization in 2021 to do the national engagement for the integrated strategy on radioactive waste, where the recommendations came forward to NRCan. And now I'm working with NWMO again and doing community engagement and consultation for the setting process for the intermediate level waste.
Oh, that's exciting. That's very cool. So, I just had the pleasure of actually just meeting you guys. Already, I was inspired because just that approach, and why you were doing the work and getting a sense of it. I'd love to explore that a little more. But something we're really passionate about is, again, we support self-determination. We're not here to say that this is what you need to do. We want to support the communities and make those informed choices. Greg, we'll start with you. What drew you into the nuclear sector and what surprised you the most when you started in it?
How did I get here? It was a job for one, but it came because of the people I knew all across Ontario, and someone that I had hired was actually looking for someone to help do engagement in the communities. And I guess my name came up throughout a whole lot of people then. Mm-hmm. And I had just left the job like that day. So it was one of those, okay, that's what I have to do. And it was like about a month later, I was actually in the job. I didn't know that I wanted it because I didn't know a whole lot about nuclear, but I know people and I talk and I talk and I talk. So that's generally how you need to be able to talk with people. You have to have those type of connections to be able to do engagement work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sure talking to the people that you knew, there was a level of trust and thought maybe this is something worth exploring, right? And worth your time.
Oh, it probably took me, I didn't actually sign my contract for like a month and a half while I was learning. And then it came up, okay, you've learned enough. What do you think? Yeah. And so I signed the contract and I've been here 10 years now.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Time flies. Yeah, absolutely. So, Brittany, yourself, what drew you into the sector and what surprised you the most once you started working in it?
For the sector, for example, my community is Neashing near Lake Huron, and our territory houses Bruce Power, which is the largest nuclear generating station in the world. And so not by choice, but by sort of default, we're a nuclear community. So I started off in the industry by working for the Environment Office, the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation Environment Office. And I did community engagement for the first DGR project, for the first proposed DGR project by OPG. And then NWMO came around and there was this new project and they were looking for someone in community or that was familiar with the community that they'd be engaging with to work for the organization. And so I threw my hat in the ring, and I had known NWMO from some of their community liaison meetings in my previous role, and I was really impressed by the work that the organization did around reconciliation, Indigenous inclusion. They had a reconciliation policy, an Indigenous knowledge policy, and so those were the things that I hadn't seen with working with other organizations in the industry up until then. So I think that's kind of what made me apply for the position, and it's just been a continuous learning journey.
That's incredible. Sarah, what drew you into this work, and what surprised you the most?
I think for myself, it was just sort of a progression. Like the last 10 to 15 years, I've worked on different energy projects for different proponents. So I've worked I did some work with TC Energy. I did some work actually on solar, so on renewables. They were a client of mine for quite a few years. I did some work with OPG on community consultation on the refurbishment for the Pickering plant. So that's actually not too far from my community. OPG is about an hour from my community. I had a very good friend of mine who worked at NWMO, who I had spent some of my time in my career previously when I worked in politics in Ottawa, and he had transitioned over to NWMO. So he had reached out and had seen if I was asked if I was interested in helping out in a project. And so once I learned a little bit more about the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, their approach and their commitment to reconciliation, and the leaders that they have that work within the organization, I was happy when I did the first round of work, and then when they called me back, I'm like, absolutely. Sometimes when you're a consultant and you're doing work, the nice thing is that you're able to choose the clients that you want to support and the clients that you want to work with. And I would say the people that I've met that work and the leadership at Nuclear Waste Management Organization are very committed. So it makes the work that I do a lot more meaningful.
Yeah. Absolutely. There's kind of a consistent theme I hear there. Like work is being done differently and NWMO does things differently. We've got to see that to an extent, but you guys are doing it. You're living it. And so like, what does that relationship with communities look like? What does partnership look like? How is it different? How do they approach it? How do you guys approach it? Right. And so everyone wants to jump in and take this one.
I think the work that we're actually doing is having real engagement, not just engagement. You have to be there in the community. You have to be starting that relationship with the community. Because if we just try to go in and say, let's do this, let's do that, it's not really going to work. You have to start with a relationship. Lots and lots of people start out not knowing anything about NWMO or nuclear. What we do, we go in, we actually educate people. I'm not trying to sell anything, because that's the first thing that people look at us. Oh, you're just trying to sell us this or trying to sell you that. I don't sell anything. I'm here to educate and make sure that people understand what the process is, what we're trying to do. And when they understand it, they can make the decision.
Yeah. So just to add to what Greg said previously, Greg and I worked on Indigenous engagement in the southern region for the project before site selection. And so one of our priorities was essentially meeting communities where they're at. It's really hard for an industry to just go into a community and expect to get in front of everyone at once. And so we did things a little unconventionally. We had like a bingo, for example, where people would come in, we provide dinner and they learn, and then we'd play a game of bingo. We flipped burgers at community events. We're just present. And so we did things a little bit differently. And then slowly we built up that trust and we built those relationships with community members and leadership. And then we were able to have difficult conversations, but it took time. It was a pretty big commitment, and we were out and about all the time.
I'm just going to add, I think sometimes that we find too, when we go into communities, especially if they're new communities, is that there's conversations that happen and they're difficult conversations. And I mean, I think for the work that I've done in the past few years, I realize that a lot of our community members, grassroots leaders have their guard up, right? Because we have in this country, there's a history of infrastructure and projects and things just being done without consultation, right? Like there's obviously hundreds of years of evidence of that happening. And so seeing a company that's taking a different approach, a lot of people are wary of that. Right. So I think like what Greg and Britt said, being in the community and building that relationship and building something together that you're learning together, and then also knowing that you're supporting a process. And I think now we're seeing a shift in what we're talking about in FPIC, right? So food product informed consent. So we want to ensure that communities are informed and that they are informed early, so then they can make educated decisions on the best possible way forward for their community.
And it, like, again, underpinning everything that said, it, a big part of that is building a relationship that's built on trust, right? And then showing up. It's really interesting when, and we hear it often, engagement and consultation, big C, little c, it's as if we treat it like a process, it'll be treated as such, and it's so hard to build trust around it. And yes, it can be a process and we have a goal and we look at it like that, but it prioritizes a relationship building, where the outcome is like, we need a meaningful relationship and we'll drive through the process. Then you see greater engagement, right? You see a greater relationship being built. That seems evident in the work that you guys are doing. And so that's individually in these roles. Tell us a little bit about, how do you feel supported in these roles? What does getting educated in this sector look like? What are some of the opportunities to learn more about the nuclear fuel cycle, and not just in terms of what you guys are doing, but I mean outside that, and what does support look like?
So yeah, starting out, I had no idea what I was getting into, and it probably took a good year. I followed people around that were in the job already, and they're showing you, this is the way we do this is the way we do that, and so I picked up a lot from that. After a year of following around this one to that one to that one, you do it your own way. And then they set you free. And they set me free on a lot of different communities. And I did it my own way. And one of the things that some people had told me was, oh, you don't tell the story the way this one told me it. Well, it's more fun for me if I tell it my way. And it's just, that's just the way I do things. You learn it. You follow somebody around, and then from that, you tell your own story. I'm not one for blowing smoke. It's you can't lose that trust by just telling people this is what they say. You have to be able to tell them properly and truly that story doesn't change when you get further down the line. You have to believe it, or I have to believe it, or it's not going to work. If it doesn't work on me, it's not going to work on trying to build that trust with someone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Brittany, what does it look like starting in the industry and getting to learn much more about it, and support look like? What has it looked like, and has it been effective?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that is really important is creating safe spaces for dialogue. And that's like, as Indigenous people, it's that work in the industry with a lot of non-Indigenous people and people who aren't familiar with First Nations communities. We give that space for them to ask questions about some of the communities we're working in, or some of the nuances with engaging with Indigenous people. And that kind of is reciprocated when it comes to like a nuclear question. If I had a question about, I don't even know how many questions I've had, but the borehole drilling process, for example, I could go to one of my colleagues and there was sort of a no done question atmosphere, which was really great for someone who that's not my background. And so we just created those safe spaces to have that dialogue back and forth and ask questions.
And that's important. I mean, if you're going to learn about areas that, you don't have the background, you should be able to feel comfortable and ask those questions, and then, getting the support so that you can better do your job, right?
So for myself, it was a very steep learning curve. I don't have a background in sciences or engineering. And so really immersing myself. And even when we were having like sessions with communities and they were learning, I was there learning too, right? So reading as much as I can and really researching the facts on how, the first project was done, how nuclear energy works. Of course, not coming from the industry, everyone has this idea that, these big sloshy buckets of toxic waste, and coming to find out, they're in like these, steel, like they look like steel pellets, So, I mean, just really like educating myself and learning as I went. So when we did the first engagement, the first reach out for engagement for the integrated strategy for radioactive waste, it was actually during COVID. So that was like a layer of complexity, right? Where we couldn't actually go to communities. And even if we offered to go to communities are like, no, nobody is allowed to even come in here. And so it was having to deal with the communities that are having to deal with all of this pandemic and all of the measures that are being put in the communities and everything that they're doing to keep their communities safe. And on top of it, coming and saying, how about we have this conversation? So that was sort of layered, it layered the difficulties in trying to have those conversations and talking about educating on nuclear waste and about the options that are there to deal with the intermediate level waste. So to me, it's been a very steep learning curve, but I'm getting a lot more comfortable with it. And then I have these beautiful people here who really help me understand things too when I have questions.
And that comes through, like listening to you, you already, you have strong acumen in regards to the business, right? And then in terms of what you have to do, and then those messages you have to convey. And that's really important, like that you have a strong support network to approach those type of topics and subject matter experts that you can be able to phone up and call and then address some of those issues. Because I think it's a tall order to ask us to do work to help to articulate, build trust, articulate, explain that aren't necessarily in our areas. But I think something that comes through, certainly for me, is I think your expertise is building trust, honest, credible, and then taking that, just nerd talk, right? This is technical stuff. And I say that as an engineer and a bit of an health physicist, that it really is just some things like that. But I mean, the real art is being able to take that information and so that people can receive it, they can understand it, they become informed, right? And then hopefully they make a decision that they feel informed and engaged and comfortable with. And so when you think about projects and like this particular project that are multi-generational, so what does responsibility, what is stewardship, what is sustainability, what does 7 generations look like when you're doing engagement and you're talking about these long projects?
So not just working in nuclear, your own background. I'm Ojibwe. We talk about 7 generations, and those are kind of ingrained in you. So these are things that you have to think about anyway. And talking with community members, they want to talk like that. They want to understand things multi-generational. This project is going to be around for a lot of years, and the community will have to take really good ownership of it. The agreements have to be in place with an organization, but your community really has to have ownership of it by not that it's your material, but it's got to be multiple years and years to make sure that it stays where it's supposed to stay. It's the environment is a huge thing. A lot of the communities that we do talk to, I had thought it was going to be very easy to do. And we were going to talk about money and we're going to talk about this. But the community that we were dealing with didn't really care about money. They wanted to ensure that their people and the land was going to stay good. In the end, you do talk about money, but they wanted to make sure that the environment was taken care of first.
It is like you said, 7 generations sustainability. It comes right across this country, right across Turtle Island. Sustainability, being able to exercise our rights to a degree that we're comfortable with in perpetuity, forever. And 7 generations is the language that we use to talk about that. And so, Brittany, how does stewardship, how does responsibility, how does all that show up in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, one of the things that was really interesting is that everyone that we talked to wanted the full picture. They wanted to see how these pellets were created, where the uranium was mined, like what's the post-closure plan for the plant or for the project, and all of those things. And similar, the nuclear industry, like we were specifically engaging on a deep geological repository, but they wanted to talk about the production of the waste and things like that. And the communities were then looking at like medical isotope. They didn't separate the industry into waste and production. They wanted to see the entire picture. And I think that's similar to the whole idea of 7 generations, because you're seeing where things are coming from and where they're going, and you can get that fulsome picture. And really, as being stewards of the land was, like Greg said, the environment was priority number 1, and the water and what was going to happen, if anything, to those things. And I think that's where community members that might not have been pro-industry, for example, but they were really had a deep connection to the land, and the stewards of the land wanted to be part of the discussions to see what would happen with the project.
Yeah, no kidding. It like again, it always comes up, right? You mentioned something interesting here, and it's that the communities were interested in the full cycle and wanted to get fully invested, right? And I think that's incredibly fascinating. Did you see that as well too in your work, like wanting to know everything about the industry when asked to make a decision on one specific part, but very engaged in the full cycle? Because to them, to these communities, to our communities, that's sustainability. That's important in the big picture. And did you see that as well too?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I still see it in the conversations that we have. And I think all really what it comes down to is self-determination. So communities are going to decide for themselves when they're armed with the information on what they will accept and what they won't accept, and the vision that they have for their community, for their youth, for their elders, for the whole community as a whole. I think we also heard that plain language is important. So when trying to explain things to community members, if there's not a level of knowledge, and that's even for myself, to put it in like plain language, not in like engineering talk or science talk. And I understand that, of course, some is very complex and it's not so easy to explain in plain language, but that's what we heard. I know that a engagement when we did for the integrated strategy on radioactive waste, over and over, every single conversation that we had, water was a priority, that the protection of water and the importance of water. I was happy to see that in this first siting process, that water wasn't even mentioned. And now in the second siting process document, we see that water is at the forefront, and it's now in there. It's now been integrated. And that to me was a signal that industry was listening. Industry was listening to the messaging coming from Indigenous communities, from Indigenous members, participants, grassroots people, leaders. And so to see that integrated and being identified as a priority, I think was very, very important to the people who were part of the process.
Oh, absolutely. Like, and what a great trust building exercise as well, too. And so to see that process improved and to reflect what's important to the communities, right? And so again, back to that relational people, like that relational aspect, transparency, trust, accountability, and then make sure it shows up, and then have people doing that work and then making sure that, it's done and it's understood. So again, technical work, long-term possible impact, managing that risk, all those type of things. And we talked about stewardship and responsibility. So how does our Indigenous values, we talked about 7 generations, how do our community values, how do we ensure that those show, how do you as people, not necessarily the organization, how do you as people ensure that those show up in the work that you do, and that in the work that you do, and then hopefully in the project as it advances forward? So, how do you assert that indigeneity and those values, right?
That's a lot.
Right, right. I don't pick one.
Um,
Yeah. How do your values show up? How do you make sure they show up?
you have to have the like I was saying, they're ingrained in
Mhm.
your being,
Mhm.
in what you do and how you do it. Yeah, I work for nuclear waste management, but I'm Ojibwe first. I come from Anishinaabe First Nation. I can't switch that part off and turn the corporate Greg on. It's just I can do it rather easily with working inside the community. When I'm in the community itself, you have to be able to be true to yourself to be able to do that engagement work.
Mhm.
It's just there's no way around it. You are who you are, and the way you were brought up, it's going to shine through because there is no way that you can
Yeah. Can't
not be you. It's just not.
right. I know. Yeah. I remember a lot of times, like, I really struggled because I thought I had to leave the Indian at the door, or turn off. And I was like, it just felt like I was outside of my skin if I ever did. And I don't know, I was young, was like, I'm not doing that anymore. And maybe I was doing that to myself. Maybe I felt that that person wasn't welcome. I was like, no, I'm just going through, I'm just going to be those values. Like, we talk about the good life back home in Amimatsu and the good life, right? And so like a lot of similarities in Ojibwe. Pimachisuan, and a lot of similarities in living and stuff like that. And then I don't leave them at the door anymore.
Yeah,
we bust through, we go through.
I can turn it down,
Yeah. Yeah.
but I
Well,
turn it
yeah.
off.
Yes, I can, not to mute. I can take it from 10 to 9, maybe 8. Yeah. Yeah. We ain't going mute. Yeah. So,
Yeah, if I
Yeah.
got to mute, I'll be leaving.
oh, absolutely. Out the door. Yeah, I know. Someone says, no, can you turn that red off? It's like, no, I'm out.
I
So,
know who I am.
right. And so, and Brittany, like, how do you, like, being your authentic Indigenous self, how do you ensure that those values are heard, that you don't have to mute them, turn them down, and then you could show up and do your work the way you see fit?
Yeah, and I mean, might be one of the biggest challenges being an Indigenous person working in the industry, in government, in corporations, and things like that that weren't necessarily built up for our people to succeed. And so, like Greg said, like I'm an Anishinaabe first. I'm a mother first. I'm an auntie. I'm a sister. I'm all of those things before I'm the manager of Indigenous Assessment at the NWMO.
Mhm.
That's just my role. And I feel like that's what defines me least of all in my life. And so I like to bring that person to the job. And when we're working in communities and with First Nations, no matter what nation it was, we were at one time working in my community. And so that was easy. But when I worked in other communities, I always said that I'm community first. My allegiance is to Indigenous people in this industry. And I really, Greg talking and the question brought up a couple of things. And one of them was that I don't think that Indigenous people are in these roles and in these organizations to just fall in line. I think that we're put in there to disrupt the system a little bit, ruffle some feathers here and there, and make people see things in a different way. And one of the examples I always talk about, because I do a lot of craft work, I do harvesting, and I work with birch bark and quills. And so I talk about some of the teachings I learned about birch bark harvesting. And some of them are like a certain time of year on a really hot day or after a big thunderstorm. And so all of that perfect storm of things could line up, but then you go into the bush and you do a test on a tree and it just says it's not ready. And so that's some of the nuances that are similar to working with Indigenous people. An organization might think they have all of these things lined up and in place, but that community is just not ready. And so you have to take your time. You have to go back again and again, and you have to test that tree. And so I push back against timelines often, which is a bit of irony now that I work at the impact assessment side of things, because it's once you submit that product description, it kind of starts a bit of a clock. And so we're working inside of that system and trying to build relationships with First Nations. So it's a difficult process, but as long as I'm being true to myself and who I am, I think that hopefully will create some good work.
Yeah. And you mentioned some really interesting things. It's that, Indigenous people are being included more and more meaningfully within organizations, and it's less token. And it really, like, I feel like our value is being realized in different, new, novel, innovative ways. And part of that is being a disruptor. It's like their organizations are doing things differently, and we're getting to kind of lead some of that differences, right? And so, Sarah, in your work as a consultant, like, do you feel that you are able to, again, lead and live and work authentically to your values and able to disrupt and do things more meaningful and achieve better outcomes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And I mean, I think like even through my career, even through like childhood. So I went to Indian day school for 9 years. Right. So that really shapes your in a way, the way that you think and your connection to community, your connection to not only the community, but the people that you're going to be connected to for the rest of your life. And so I think that you bring that forward. And I've left spaces where I felt tokenized. And it really disrupts like the way that you think and the way that you carry yourself when you're tokenized within an organization. And so being able to be a consultant, and like I said, being able to choose the projects that I work on, being able to choose the clients that I work with it's rewarding. And your advice, your guidance, your vision is valued. So a lot of the work that I do too is answering the call to action 92. So a lot of corporations who are coming and they want to start their journey on reconciliation, but they don't really know like where to start or how to start. And so we've been very fortunate to work on some great projects in that way. And so that's when I started working with NWMO. They were far beyond that, right? And then so coming into the organization and being welcomed into spaces with their advisory council, their youth and elder advisory council, and seeing that how much internally that they've really invested in the capacity of Indigenous staff and I see like the approach that they take to their work is much different than what I've seen in the past. So I think being able, even collectively seeing that, it creates a space and an environment where people are comfortable to be themselves and they feel confident to bring forward their vision, not only as a First Nation person or an Indigenous person, but also within as a community person. So I think it makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
I think in the work that organizations, companies do when they invest in that.
Absolutely. And there's so much said here, and then we'll revisit, I think, and then it shows up in, I think, what everyone's talking about here. And Brittany, you mentioned, like, we're Indigenous people first, we're community people first. And we happen to do these work. This happens to be the roles that we're in. And a lot of times we'll get pressure as Indigenous people, like we're selling out. And it's so frustrating, like as if I've compromised on my Indigenous values and my worldview to go and do this work. And a big part of that is, again, really frustrating, and you feel pressure from all sides. So how do you like navigate? And Greg, we'll start with you. Like, how do you navigate that space? This is the work you do. You're Indigenous. You prioritize that, your community, but you're still advancing this work. From my perspective, it isn't zero sum. It isn't one against the other. There is something in the middle that making sense and more sense to everyone, right? I think as you bring these things closer together, how do you navigate that space? How do you deal with the haters and, and yeah, the arrows in the back, as someone else said? I think we talked to someone else. Greg, how does dealing with that look like for you?
One of the biggest people that, and I tell this story a lot, one of the biggest haters of the industry is my mother. I work on her quite a bit. Still not working, but
it's in progress.
It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
But if you can tell your story, you continually educate, you continually try to get that one person to understand. I'm here to educate and make sure that people are educated, they make up their own mind. But yeah, my mother's not a big fan of the work that I do, but she has a better understanding of talking to me because I take care of my family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not on somebody's list to get money and this and that. Hopefully I'm on the NWMO list.
You're on payroll. So, yeah.
I'm on the payroll list.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things that, yes, it's a job.
Yeah.
Yes, you have to do, I'm out there educating. I'm not selling anything. We do get it quite a bit. Doesn't matter who you are, that we're selling out.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, you're in the industry. They got you in their pocket now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not so much. I'm doing my job. I'm making sure that people are educated, and it's one of the biggest things that we do.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that we're selling out.
Mm-hmm.
You can't buy my soul for money.
Yeah,
I'm just not going to go that way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's one of those things that, yes, we get it once in a while. I don't have a whole lot of arrows in my back. I sat on band council for a while.
Yeah, you got to think
that's where I got that.
That's scar tissue. They didn't just bounce off. Yeah, they just bounced off. There you go.
But it's you have to walk that path very carefully, because people are funny.
Yeah,
and they're not. You can try to educate them, and you're not going to get everybody.
Yeah,
and that's okay.
Yeah, that's fun.
Not everybody likes the same thing, but if you're educated, it changes a little bit, and over time, maybe you'll get to not so much my mother, but
yeah, absolutely, right. And then you put your best foot forward, try to educate, and people receive, and they make their decisions, and there's not much more you can kind of do past that, right? So appreciate that. So
how does it feel to be a seller?
Yeah, exactly. How much? Yeah. Your soul?
Well, it's funny because in one of our engagement sessions when we were working in my community, I was called a sellout, essentially. I was asked by an elder in our community, does it feel like you're selling out? And my response was similar to my response to the last question, was like, I went away to school and I got an education and I got some work experience and I moved back to my community. intentionally because I wanted to work in my community and I wanted to raise a family here. And that was my goal. And so the work again that I do is community focused and community first. And so that was sort of my response to her question. And so it sparked a different dialogue. Greg and I were also at an engagement where we were shamed. Essentially, someone said shame on you and was trying to get us secretly to talk shit about the industry and the project. And then we were able to have a dialogue and I was saying, you know what, I have kids and I'm raising them in this community and I want a future for them that was different than what I grew up in, what was different than my mom and my ancestors grew up in. And this is sort of a path towards that I can see. So we talked about that and I've never been on council, but my mom was when I was in my teenage years. And so I think she taught me how to have thicker skin so that the arrows take a little bit more to get through, I think. And I think that's a big part of it is being confident in who you are and the work that you're doing and your experience that those things, while you might remember them, they don't impact the way you walk through life and your work.
Absolutely. So what does that look like?
Yeah.
It is a tough one.
So I was a latchkey rescue in the 80s. So I got pretty thick skin. I have my brothers, but I mean, it's hard, right? So I think sometimes you have things thrown at you. I've been called not nice names, but I think like at the end of the day, I'm like, that they don't know me. Because if they did know me, they would know, where my values lie. And to think that I would ever intentionally hurt not only my community, but other communities is definitely not the person that I am or the values that I hold. So I think I walk every day knowing, where my priorities lie, where my values lie. And so, I mean, I could be called a sellout. I could be called many names in the book, but I know it's not my true self. I know who I am. And like I said, those who know me know that's not the person that I am either. I would never intentionally do harm in any community. So and I am on council. I just got elected. I just started elected. And it's tough, right? It's tough to see hurt in your community. It's tough to not be able to make everybody happy and to solve all of the problems while you're trying to focus on this and make decisions and try to support progress in the community. But then there's also the humanistic side of, me, I'm hurting, this is what I need. And so trying to balance that is definitely challenging. But I think, even people on council get called sellout in Haudenosaunee communities, right? That's not our traditional way. And so now you're no longer, this and we like to label ourselves rather than maybe, coming to an understanding or working together in many ways. But I would say that that's not the reality all the time. It happens, but it's not the reality every time because I don't know if my skin is that thick.
No, fair enough. We have those people that can't be convinced, like they have such a strong position. But you do have large groups of people that, again, you build that relationship, you build that trust with, and they take that information and they're able to analyze and assess it objectively and fairly, right? And then they see these things for what they are. They see the project for the risk that it potentially could have, but they see the opportunity, they see the benefit. They're weighing everything, I think, more fairly and objectively, right? And so, but that's your work, right? Is to get people so that they're, again, making the best decisions for themselves and as leaders and for community. And then you get to a place where everyone's, or at least most people are aligned and they say yes, or they say no, right? They get to that position. So in all the work you do and you get them to that position and say it's consent, say it's yes, how do you sustain that? Like, what does work look like? What does that relationship look like? And how do you support that? So you get a community, they support the project, they support the work you're doing. And how do you get them to continue and to stay? Because we know band politics, we know those cycles, we know governance changes, we know our communities, how is some of the work that we've done going to help ensure that there's a process that sustains the information, the education, awareness, and then the yes. We'll use yes as an example, right? Could be no. And then, but I mean, we'll use yes. How do you sustain consent?
It's just another day.
Yeah.
It really is.
It really is.
You get to a point that you get the yes.
Yeah.
Or you get the no.
Yeah.
The next day, you have to sustain that relationship because it looks disingenuous if you get the yes and then you go away. We have to show up on day one after the vote.
Yeah.
We're going to sustain this engagement. That relationship has to go forward.
Yeah.
It's, like being married.
Yeah.
After the I do, you don't just go away. You have to keep working on it and making sure that people felt heard. And that's one of the biggest things in engagement. I'm not here just to throw things at you, make sure that you understand something. I need to know what you need as well. So you have to keep going with that relationship. There's no way around it.
Absolutely. It's not just about getting them to the altar and saying I do. You got work to do. The real work of and I mean the fruits and the real joy is past that I do and everything that comes after. What does sustaining consent look like?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Greg said, it's still being in community. It's still flipping burgers. It's still showing up to events. It's still making calls and being there and answering questions when they come. And because no project or engagement are you going to get every single member of a community to the same level of knowledge. In every community that we've ever worked in, there's people that have zero knowledge of the work. And then there's people who have read our entire transportation framework in a community. And so there's such a varying degree of knowledge about a project. And I'm sure that's the same for any industry. We always talked about how some of the hardest part of our job is getting people to actually come and talk to us. And then we can actually have those conversations, but not everyone's going to talk to us. So you still have to keep that same work going. You still have to inform people about the project and what it looks like. But then you also have to inform about, like for the high level waste DGR project, we have to talk about impact assessment and what that process looks like and engage community on those different aspects. So it's just that maintaining that relationship and still maintaining that level of trust and transparency and all of those things still remain the same.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And so, Sara, in your experience,
Well,
again,
I think that like everything that Greg and Brett said is great. It's very reflective of their experience. I won't comment on that because I haven't worked with NWMO.
Yeah.
I wasn't part of the process or the yes vote or the no vote.
Yeah.
For the the communities, and that's their choice. But I'll tell a story.
Yeah.
I worked for before I had my own company. I worked for another consulting company, and we had a proponent that said, okay, we have this agreement with the community, and we want the leaders to sign a document that's saying if anyone in their community objects or protests the project, that they will shut them down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that just goes to the show, like sometimes the disconnect, right, between corporations and their eye on the end goal and not really understanding, appreciating, or even wanting to learn the complexities in our communities. Thought that if one person agrees on something that the whole community agrees on it.
Yeah.
We're very, very different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, would you expect in Toronto or in Ottawa that everyone's going to agree on one certain topic of, like a project or something?
Yeah. Or how they agree.
Or how they agree.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not going to be the same.
It's just so like the disconnect, right?
Yeah.
And of course we pushed back. We're like, that's just not going to happen.
Yeah.
Like people are free to say what their opinions are in their communities. Well, they're going to block the project. Well, then then they can block the project.
Yeah.
Like we can't, as leaders, cannot go and tell, you know what I mean? Like how our community members are going to behave. So, I mean, I think that just goes to show, like when we talk about consent, when we talk about agreements or disagreements, and I think the approach in it makes all the difference too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And this is probably something we could spend a whole part 2, right? And a whole another hour on. And it's a fascinating, and we have to keep talking about it. We have to. And I think there's so much amazing work that you guys are doing that'll help inform that. Is like that, and getting to yes and consent and everything is truly an individual nation's kind of sovereign right? And so how that nation gets to it, it's not going to be the same, but how they get to it, how their leaders engage with their membership and inform them as well too, not just an industry responsibility, it's a leadership. How do you consult your own membership and then make sure that they're engaged and informed, right? You can get consent on a community ban referendum. And how does that happen? And again, we need to really think about this. How do we engage our people so that they're truly informed and then we feel truly empowered as leaders to be able to make that if we have to make those decisions. And then again, once we get there, how do we sustain that relationship? How do we cultivate a meaningful 33-year marriage, right? and beyond. And so one last question I want to kind of wrap up with. There's so much amazing work that's being done. We talked about how you guys have entered the different, into the work, into the sectors. We talked a little bit about, even what surprised you the most. But if you were going to talk to youth and say, this is a very interesting, exciting, different place to go, and it's a rewarding place to go, what would you say to a youth considering a career in the nuclear sector? And if you were to encourage them, what would some things you would say to them?
So how you get there will be totally different for a lot of different people. If you're looking at the electrical side of it, you can go that route. You can go into the labor side of it. There's a lot of different things. I think the Bruce site itself, I heard there's like 1,500 people working in the site. They all have various different jobs, but you kind of gotta, like, taking me out of it and taking my job. I didn't get here by going to school for.
Yeah,
it's kind of tough to having an MBA. That's different for a lot of different people. Mine's a master of being around. So
I'm going to rename my MBA to Master of Being Around. Forget Master of Business Lit. I got a Master of Being Around.
So doing those kind of things. This second project that we're working on, intermediate level waste.
Yeah,
that's going to be the next iteration of what people are talking about. You have to be able to find your way into those. I joke about the master of being around, but that's how I got here.
Nope, absolutely. That's lived and learned experience, like that not necessarily comes from post-secondary institution. That's incredibly valuable.
I was told I used to write for a few different areas. I had suggested to myself that I should go learn how to write. And the editor told me, no, people understand what you're saying because it sounds like you telling the story. If you go to school, they will wreck you. And so I took that to heart, and it's not something I decided to do. I write very well, but it sounds like I'm the one talking, and people understand that. But for kids that are going to be getting into the industry, find what you're really good at. Find whether it's electricity, whether you're a laborer, whether you're a firefighter. All of those things are needed in this industry. Find your way in and make your way over there.
Yeah. Awesome.
Just what first came to mind is that representation is so important. We did a lot of engagements with youth in the community and some of the teachers in the elementary school, and we did presentations there. And so for youth and children to see themselves in these organizations and the people that work there is so important. And so I know we did a presentation with youth, and one of my little cousins who kind of knows that I work in the industry, she learned about the DGR project through me, asked a question at a presentation to our CEO and was like, how do I become CEO of the Nuclear Waste Management Organization? And so I think
perfect. I'm going to start somewhere. See what happens.
Straight from the top. I mean, I like it. And I think that's part of it is just encouraging youth to ask those questions and find something that it fits with you. Like, where do you see yourself in and how do you get there? Because again, like, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a scientist, but there's space for all those people in these roles and in these organizations. And then I think too, going back to my disruptor comment, that knowing that it's not that you don't need to necessarily fall in line, that you're there and you're valued and important in those positions, I think is good. So again, just representation is really
That's awesome. Yeah. If you can't see it, can be it,
Mhm.
and be a disruptor. Like, so disrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. I don't think I mean, I agree with everything that Greg and Britt said, but I mean, like, so for example, I have a daughter and she's
Yeah.
in university,
Mhm.
and I had a conversation with her almost a year ago. I'm like, you really should look at the nuclear industry. Like, there's so much opportunity. And her first thing was like, I'm not smart enough for that. And so I think that sometimes our youth just have this ingrained, like, oh, I can't do that. That's something like that's like, nuclear is like this, and it's so technical that I wouldn't fit in there. I couldn't do that. So I mean, just emphasizing there's so many other ways that you can be in the industry and not be a scientist or be
Yeah.
an engineer. There's many ways that you could still work in the industry, right?
Yeah.
And then funny enough, I have a family member who is an electrician and was a youth and then ended up working at a nuclear plant. And so they've been there for quite a few years, and like things are going good. So
Yeah.
it's just sort of happened and just sort of stumbled upon. And but I think that, I mean, there's a huge emphasis on the need for young people in STEM, Indigenous people in STEM, and
Yes.
Indigenous girls.
Yes. Absolutely. Yes to all that. Yes, 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 yes. Absolutely. And so like this has been amazing, and I couldn't agree more. On the nuclear sector, I started out as a technician, and disruptor, big part stubborn. And I think which really helped me, but I started fairly entry level, and I thought the same thing. Like I heard people talk about things like those are aliens. That's another right. Like, what's going on over there? But there was enough people, and not even necessarily Indigenous, that made it so accessible. And then I left, and I had a trajectory, and I probably could have did even more. Maybe the CEO of a company, and I left for much different reasons, but I left as a senior engineer, and I did all these senior jobs, and complicated and hard. And like our people can do it. I grew up in a small remote community and did some questionable things that people could easily question my intelligence, my IQ and whatnot. But I mean, yeah, just, get out there, try it, do it. And there's so many great opportunities. And so this afternoon has been absolutely a blast. So much fun. I'm so honored that you guys come and talk to us here at the Indigenous Resource Network. And yeah, I appreciate it. So thank you very much.